When Solo came out this past May, I found myself in a most unusual mood. Not caring about a new Star Wars movie. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe just the exhaustion over debating The Last Jedi. It was still just too fresh. Or maybe my spirit was feeling just a little bit down from all the rampant negativity. But I found myself just unable to muster the energy to care. It's hard to describe succinctly, but Star Wars has begun to feel a whole lot less special, and I know I'm not alone in thinking that. But maybe it's not really Disney's fault, though. Maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe the reason the 18 to 35 demographic is so widely sought is because they still have the most energy to care, and as I get closer to exiting that age cluster, I'm starting to lose, slowly, that pulsing heat of anticipation for new content, the heartbeat of raw emotion that thrums with passion whenever Star Wars returns. Maybe I'm just subconsciously embittered by Disney rewriting Star Wars for a new generation, something I support with open arms but harbor some unresolved resentment for under the surface. Or maybe it's because we Star Wars fans have been through just too much abuse and I've grown defensive and cold. But I guess I should review Solo, a Star Wars movie, right? It's an alright movie. It's good, I guess. Is that what you all wanted to hear? It's an enjoyable watch. It doesn't challenge the mind or reach any higher than what it aims to do. It doesn't try to add too much, nor does it take away anything either. It conducts itself professionally and neutrally, portraying the story of Han Solo without taking a single risk outside of adding Cthulhu, I guess? It's a fun and entertaining cinematic experience to follow up the dark and dour Last Jedi. But this isn't the suddenly oppressive episodic Star Wars. Oh, this was all about Han friggin' Solo. And who doesn't love Han Solo? You gotta be an asshole not to love Han Solo. He is part of the holy trinity of Star Wars lore, and his contribution to the canon cannot be overstated. He added depth, he added charisma and personality, and he goes through a ton of character development, and the decades after Return of the Jedi saw him in numerous books and comics, some of which are truly excellent. And Disney, well, they were smart to make a movie about him. Because Han isn't just an icon for the series, but an icon of American cinematic culture. And I believe that they've done something good with their take on the character of Han Solo by extracting even more personality out of him. Where the George Lucas vision of the character was mostly a suave gunslinger with an anti-villain turned anti-hero-ish angle, Force Awakens and Solo feature a lot more smuggling, swindling, lying, and talking himself through situations. I think they took the character of Han and did a good job preserving what made him the classic cinematic character we've known and loved for decades, but actually added to him, having him come across as even more flawed and human than ever before. And this is what excited me about Solo, the celebration, the immersion. But of course no movie is without its flaws, and no critic is without their gripes. The dialogue can be a little clunky at times, and there really isn't much of an ending. It just kind of stops when it's time to stop. It doesn't leave much of an imprint on you after the fact. It just kind of comes and goes in your life. Perhaps the problem was that more energy was put into setting up the iconography of Han Solo instead of exploring him personally. In other words, we got to learn where he got his name and his pistol and his ship and his black best friend and his Wookiee, I guess, but we didn't learn much new about the man. Though, in fairness, I think there is something to be said of making Han a bit of a wide-eyed idealist. I actually like that. It makes his later brotherly bond with Luke and parental bond with Rey all the sweeter. It's also a shame to see Ron Howard's great talents and personal imprint go to waste. Howard was in George Lucas's American Graffiti. Wouldn't it have been cool to see a bigger emphasis on like street racing or like gritty piloting or something like that instead of just a bunch of talking? Ron Howard's name is slapped on the cover of this film, but Solo felt tightly controlled by the studio and impersonal. But maybe Disney was too nervous to start another flame war, so they picked the boring middle ground. And again, I guess I don't really hold that against them. The Last Jedi left the community roaring in debate, but you know what? I think that's better than a movie that leaves you with nothing to say at all. When a piece of art becomes something empty and without emotion, and the merits of its craft is predicated on its virtue of mere existence, what the hell was the point? Ultimately, Solo falls down the same trap that Rogue One and Revenge of the Sith fell into in relying too much on the already established. The Kessel Run sequence in Solo, the third act/actual heist section of Rogue One, and Anakin's fall /Jedi Purge /the fight with Kenobi /the rise of Vader are all the most exciting parts. What all three films have in common in this regard is the delight of established canon from other Star Wars films instead of creating new legacies. For example, the opera scene in Episode 3 has been praised heavily as a masterful scene in an average film because it created new mythos. Darth Plagueis was mentioned one freaking time while Palpatine tempted Anakin, and people went nuts for it. There's a book, and tons of theory crafting, from Jar Jar all the way to friggin' Snoke. But now, alas, Disney is finding themselves in the same position George Lucas found himself in during the prequels, where his original vision was continually compromised by the criticism of new ideas, while being shamed for repeating old ideas. But Lucas's movies were trashed by critics on the regular, in fact, and Star Wars was never an exception, even by his own admission. Disney is now facing the angry mob that Lucas used to shoulder all by himself, and they are realizing that the fan base is not to be trifled with, and that we Star Wars fans have been through a lot of hell over the years, and our fur is easily bristled. And from that hatred and pettiness comes actually evil behavior. But again, this isn't really new for us. The poor kid who played young Anakin Skywalker developed a form of schizophrenia because of how badly the Star Wars community attacked him. He was a kid, but we didn't seem to care. It made us feel good to tear him down. Seriously, sometimes it seems like being a Star Wars fan isn't really about enjoying it, but complaining about it. And I think this is the reason why the passion has left me. When I was a teenager, I lived through all the prequel hype and letdown. And back then, I remember discussing the movies constantly, and sometimes open-mindedly, sometimes angrily, but mostly positively. Nowadays, it's bizarre to say nice things about the prequels, and taboo to defend them. Twice now, I have lived through an era where liking Star Wars is like a crime, and we bite the hand that feeds us, and we call it an accomplishment. Trolls claim to be fighting and winning a war against Disney, when it's they themselves that suffer the most for it. But I won't exactly act like I'm better than them. I was one of them. See, most Star Wars fans seem drawn to the sick cycle of attacking what we love, fooling ourselves into thinking we are the vanguard of the franchise's quality, despite only just making things more miserable for ourselves. And it is here that I confess to the world my horrible crime of liking Solo, a Star Wars movie, and I do recommend it. I wouldn't describe it as mandatory viewing, but if you want to step back into Star Wars with a good, safe movie that's just entertaining without being challenging, then I see nothing wrong with it. In fact, it reminded me of the fun that I used to have in this world. It kind of made me want to start up a new save of Knights of the Old Republic for old time's sake. Maybe revisit an old movie. Maybe spend some time with my good friend Wikipedia. You know why? Because for the first time in a while, it kind of made me glad to be a fan again. To quote Aristotle, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. In other words, it is entirely possible to admit to the faults of Disney's early foray into Star Wars without being an asshat about it. Thanks for listening, thanks for being a nerd with me, and I'll see you next time.